Hi, my name is Lorraine Watry and welcome to my studio. I am a watercolor artist and I've worked with watercolor for 26 years now, and I thought I would start a new series of videos where I go over different tips, tricks, and techniques for working with watercolor. And hopefully these short videos will help you in your journey, and if you have a question or a technique that you would like to see, please comment below and I will try to accommodate that in a future video. Hi, today's tip and trick video is going to go over mixing grays and mixing browns for watercolor. And I thought about doing these as two videos and then decided that I would go ahead and make them one video, because there are times where, depending on the colors you're mixing, you can push it to be more of a brown neutral color or grayer. So I just decided to go ahead and combine them. Now, these are not all of the colors that you could use to mix browns or grays, but they will give you some options and some ideas about using your colors on your palette and how you might go about thinking about mixing. So one of the main tenets of mixing a neutral color, whether it's gray or brown, is that if you use a color that is across the color wheel, so a red and a green, those are complementary colors. Purple and yellow are complementary colors, and blue and orange are complementary colors, that you will get a neutral color. So whether it is leaning toward brown or leaning toward gray, you can get those mixes to be a gray or a brown. So I tend to have a couple things that I use for grays and browns, and one of the mixes that I really like is using one of my warmer browns. So I have several browns over here. In fact, these two are both burnt sienna, but one of them is Italian burnt sienna and the other is regular burnt sienna. And then I have Daniel Smith Quinacridone Scarlet and Daniel Smith I think I'm saying those wrong. One second here. It is Quin Sienna and Quin Burnt Scarlet. I knew there was something not right there. So Quinacridone Sienna and then Burnt Scarlet. And those are both, most of my colors are by Daniel Smith, but those are both by Daniel Smith. So when I do those mixes, the thing to think about is that I need my blue to lean toward purple or red, which cobalt and ultramarine blue do that. If I use one of my turquoisey blues with a burnt sienna, I will actually get something that is a neutral green. So if you're trying to do this mix, you need to use something blue-wise that leans more toward red or purple. So I have cobalt. I'll go ahead and pull that out, and then I'll get out some burnt sienna. And I tend to use burnt sienna for this, but you can also use burnt umber. And burnt umber is a little cooler brown than burnt sienna, and depends on the brand of pigment you have, what brand of paint you're using. Some of these mixes may work better than others, depending on your paint. So just by doing that, cobalt and the burnt sienna, I can get a brown. And I can make that brown a little, or brown, I can get a gray, and I can make that a little warmer gray, or I can put, I need to get a little more cobalt out. I can put a little more cobalt in the mix and have a cooler gray. So I'll go ahead and get that out. So there are two grays. Actually, yeah, they are two grays, but they're made by with the same pigments. So then you could also use ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. That would give you the same kind of similar thing. And that tends to be one of the main mixes I use that way. The other that I like to do, and this is more of a purple gray, is to take ultramarine blue, and I will use my Parole Scarlet, and this is my substitution for cadmium red. So if you have cad red on your palette, you might try that. And the reason this one works is because this is a warm red. If I tried to put one of these reds in that are cooler, I'm actually going to get a purple. So by using the warm red, it's leaning a lot toward orange, then I can get a gray that is on the purple side of gray. So depends on how much of each color. Again, I have a lot of the Pearl Scarlet in my brush still. I'm going to get some more ultramarine. And I'm not trying to make these a certain value or anything right now. I am just doing the mixes. So you can see here that this is a purple or gray. And then depending on if I put more of the red in it, it actually gives me my first kind of brown mix. It's not really brown, but it is more brown than it is gray. And the other couple mixes I will show you with grays are that you can take, what was the one I was going to do? You can take cobalt and this is going to be a 3 pigment mix. I'll use my Quinn Rose. Sorry, I'm trying to think and pull pigment at the same time. And then I'll use, I'll probably use a little bit of my New Gamboge, but you could use one of your other yellows. So I'll get just a tiny bit of this. I won't need as much yellow. So basically here I'm using all 3 primaries, and this really depends on how much of each pigment you have in it, whether or not it goes more gray or it goes more brown. So I'm going to start by mixing a purple, and I want a little more blue in this purple than red. And then I'm going to go over and get a little bit of the New Gamboge, and I think you can already see that that is going gray. And here's that mix. And it is just a touch purple, maybe because I have a little bit more purple on my brush still. And so that makes a nice gray. And the reason that I like mixing grays and browns sometimes is that I can get a variety of color within that mix. So if I decide that whatever I'm painting, I want it to go from, maybe I want it to go from this bluer, purpler mix and then go a little grayer. And then maybe I want to go into the yellow and push it so that it goes a little browner on the other side. And I probably needed a little more to make that point. But you can have that color vary where it's vibrant and then goes a little more neutral in whatever that passage is. And that makes the painting more interesting, and it also unifies the painting because you're using the same colors to go from a more vibrant layout of a shape to something that is more neutral. So those are a couple of the grays that I like to mix that way. I'll do 2 more, and this would be the burnt umber. If I can pull a little more out. And like I said, that's a slightly cooler brown, and I would suggest that if you have other browns in your pigments, that you might try mixing those browns with blues and see what you get. Because the browns lean toward the oranges, they are basically like using a complementary color. All right, so that is the cobalt and burnt umber, and it has just a little bit of a different look to the mix that I made over here. And actually this brown or gray should be down here. I put it in the wrong spot. And one of the things about mixing browns with blues is that you'll probably see a lot of granulation in them, because the blues have a lot of granular pigments, and browns, all of the earth colors are basically granulating in some way or another. I find that the Italian burnt sienna is not as granular, and maybe it's a little brighter than regular burnt sienna, and that's why I have both on my palette. And the last one I was going to do is ultramarine, and you could also use ultramarine deep, which is what I have sitting there, and the burnt scarlet. And burnt scarlet is a very deep rusty brown color, and I won't need very much of it. And this will be on the purpler side of gray again. It is, they both lean just a little toward red, so it will have a little more, add a little bit of the burnt scarlet in my brush still. There we go. So that is another gray mix, and I can also put a little more blue in it. I'll put it down here, and it will cool down just a little bit, so there's a cooler feel to that gray. And grays and browns in your paintings are not something to avoid. In fact, they're really nice counterpoints to vibrant color. So if you want to make a statement, you could have a painting that is mostly grays and neutrals, and then have a vibrant pop of color in there. And I have a painting that demonstrates that, and I will show that at the end of this video. The painting is called Splish Splash, and it's a pelican in the water. And there's lots of neutrals and grays in the painting, and then his bright orange beak shows what that can look like. And then for browns, it is the same kind of thing. You can literally take a tube brown that you have on your palette, and you might decide that you want to add a little rose to it. And so I could take my rose over here, and then by adding that rose to the burnt sienna, I can make a slightly neutral reddish brown color just by doing that. I can also mix browns, and one of the mixes that you can make is I will use my, I always forget this one. I think it's permanent orange. Yep. I don't use orange that often from my palette, and when I do, I always have to go look because I forget the names. So that's permanent orange, and that's a Daniel Smith color. And I'm going to go over and get cerulean. And you could try some of your other turquoisey blues with it, but that color and the permanent orange, depending on how much you have of each, can give you sort of a, it's kind of a greeny gray, because the turquoise leans a little toward green, and so when you put a warm color in it, you get a sort of green gray. And then if I put more of the orange in it, then I get a nice kind of taupey brown. So there's that mix. I will show you yellow and purple. And so I have Carbazole Violet on my palette, and Carbazole is a beautiful pigment just by itself. Here's that. And it is a staining color, and it is really just strong, very vibrant. So I have that one out, and I think I'll get out, I could get out New Gamboge, but I think I'm going to use my Quin Gold. And the Quin Gold is already leaning toward a more neutral color. It is also a strong pigment. It is a little darker in value and a little more color in that yellow than some yellows. And so I have a lot of yellow on my brush, and I'm just going to take it over to the Carbazole. Get maybe a touch more. And I'll go ahead and swatch that out over here. And then I could add, which that's a very pretty kind of almost walnut looking brown. I could add a little more carbazole to that mix and get a deeper brown. So what this does for you when you are mixing your own browns and grays is that allows you to have also not just the fact that your painting can be more unified, but also it allows you to have more pigments on your palette because you know you can mix some of those other colors from what you already have. Then I'm also going to show you, need some room, so I'm going to go ahead and clean some of this up. Okay, so I will pull out, I'm trying to decide. I think I'll try the Quin Rose. Some of this is just playing for me too, because a lot of the time when I am going to mix colors or do a painting, I will sit down and play with colors prior to doing the painting if it's colors that I haven't done a lot with before. So if there are lots of varieties of browns or grays in a painting, then I will sit down and swatch out pigment mixes like this just to give myself an idea of what I have available to me on my palette. So that was Quin Rose and Sap Green. And then I'm going to try this is Green Apatite Genuine. And these are all warmer greens that I have on my palette. Most of the cooler greens that I mix, I make with the yellows and blues. I don't have Viridian or some of those other greens on my palette. I do have ultramarine turquoise, and I may try a mix with that. So you can get pretty similar, actually. Both of these browns are very close to each other. The Green Apatite Genuine is a very granular pigment, and I think I'm going to actually try it. I'll try it with the carbazole. We'll see what we get. And this is a very cool, deep, almost, right now I have it, it's actually more purple in there, so it probably should be on the gray side of things, but let me get out a little more of the Green Apatite, and we'll see if it will go a little browner. Just a touch. It's still a little green, so I wouldn't necessarily classify that as brown. Okay, so if I take my Green Apatite, because that mix didn't quite work, and I'm going to mix it with my Quin Magenta. And Quin Magenta is a deep, almost purple red. It's a fuchsia. And right now it's on the burgundy side of things. If I go put some more of the Green Apatite in the mix, I should be able to push it just a little browner. There you go. Okay, so you can see where the green and the red together, as long as you've have the right combination of amount of pigment in there, you can get it to go brown. And then for blues and oranges, I will do mixes like, let me get this cleaned off here. I already did the cerulean and the permanent orange, so that's these two right here. My chart's going to be really messy because of all the colors I've used, and I'll have to try to remember. I'll see if I can mark the chart at the end so you can see that as well. So that's those two. And what's really interesting about these mixes is that once they have settled on the paper, and I'll take an image of this and put it at the end of the video as well, if you look at it closely, there is lots of little granulation happening where the cerulean is kind of peeking through that permanent orange. So you get little touches of blue in that mix, or slight little bit of orange peeking through the cerulean in the opposite one. So it's really interesting, some of the variation that you can get in these mixes, and it can make your paintings more interesting because your color is not a flat gray color. And I will be doing a video next week that is going to actually go over some tube grays that Daniel Smith came out, and I'm not going to basically, I'm not going to review them. I do like them, and they do have usability for paintings, but they're not necessarily, most of them are not necessarily ones that I have put on my palette. I will use them when I'm doing a variety of grays and I want something that I can just pull right out of the tube. And so, oops, get the right orange. So the next week's video, I will go over those grays from Daniel Smith and how they lean slightly one way or the other color-wise. This is Parole Orange. Oh, sorry. Paranone Orange. Transparent Parole Orange is next to it. And so this one is a vibrant orange, and if I put a little bit of the ultramarine blue with it, I can start. I have to be careful with the mix, because if I have too much ultramarine, it's going to go very purple quickly. And right now it is a warmer kind of rusty brown feel to it. And then if I put more of the ultramarine blue in it, then it goes on the more of the purple side of things. So both of those would be interesting mixes though. So I've done mixes from red and green, I've done the blue and orange, and I did the yellow and brown. And so really, when you're trying to come up with more neutral mixes, try mixing across your palette, across the color wheel. And it would depend of course how your palette is laid out, but basically across the color wheel. The other, I said I had one tube gray from the Daniel Smith series that I'll show you next week on my palette, and I'll just really quickly show you that. This is Alvaro's Fresco, and it is a purpley gray that I really have come to like for a lot of different things. And so for me, having that on my palette and having it available and ready, it's really nice to have that convenience color. Most of the pigments that I mix together, those are single pigments mixed with a single pigment. So a tube of paint can have more than one pigment in it to make that color. And in this case, in the Alvaro's Fresco Gray, I believe that's 3 pigments. I'll look and note that whether it is next week. It might be 2. And then the other gray, which it's kind of a black as well, this is Sodalite Genuine, and it's from Daniel Smith. And depending on how much water you have in the mix, or if you use it really concentrated right out of the tube, you can get it to look more black. Sodalite Genuine is a pigment that is a mineral from the earth that they have ground up and made into a paint. And so it is a single pigment, it has lots of granulation, and it's a very pretty kind of blue gray black is how I will note that. So there's a variety of grays and browns you can make, many more than what I have here, but hopefully this will give you an idea of how to try mixes and maybe have something where you're using those bright colors in your painting, and you can then mix across the complementary color set, and you can get some interesting browns and grays that work with your painting. So I hope that was helpful, and if you would like me to do a video on something having to do with watercolor tips, tricks, or techniques, please comment below and I will add that to my list. And then, like I said, next week I will do I'll show you the Daniel Smith pigments that you can get in the tube that are grays, and you might want to add 1 or 2 of those to your palette. And I will see you next week. Bye.